All right, you sick fucks, let's cut the crap and dive headfirst into this goddamn enigma that is Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon.
We all know him as the Watergate asshat, but
Yeah,
was Tricky Dick really as fucked up as history paints him?
right.
Let's dig into the dirt and find out.
It's wild how much Watergate overshadows everything else about the guy,
Yeah.
Nixon was a complicated motherfucker. He did some good shit, some seriously shady shit.
Yeah.
And understanding his early life is key to unpacking all that.
All right, so let's rewind to his childhood.
Wow.
I heard it was a total shit show.
Well, shit show might be pushing it.
Okay.
But he definitely had a rough start. His family's lemon ranch in Yorba Linda went belly up. They had to move to Whittier, and his dad had to hustle running a grocery store and gas station.
Lemon Ranch? What a bunch of fucking losers.
Come on.
No wonder the dude was so pissed off all the time.
Hold on. Now, let's be fair. It was the 1920s. Agriculture was tough. And on top of that,
Yeah.
Nixon lost a younger brother when he was just a kid.
Damn, that's gotta fuck you up.
Yeah.
Did that, scar him for life and turn him into a paranoid weirdo?
It's impossible to say for sure,
Yeah.
but it definitely shaped him. He also had this lung issue as a kid, maybe scar tissue from pneumonia.
Uh-huh.
So he couldn't play sports. The guy poured all his energy into academics and get this debating.
Debate. So the fucker was always a smooth-talking snake oil salesman.
He was damn good at it, won a bunch of championships in high school, then went on to Whittier College and Duke Law School. He was ambitious as hell.
Oh, yeah.
Even played poker to finance his first campaign.
Poker. Now that's more like it.
Yeah.
So when did this whole anti-communist obsession start? Was he always a red-baiting asshole?
Well, you gotta remember, he came up during the Cold War.
Right.
So anti-communism was like the air everyone breathed.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a staunch anti-communist.
Right.
And his work on the Alger Hiss case really put him on the map. Hiss was a former State Department official accused of being a Soviet spy.
Hold up, a goddamn spy? This shit's getting juicy. What the hell are the pumpkin papers I keep hearing about?
The pumpkin papers were microfilm hidden in a pumpkin. On the farm of Whittaker Chambers, the guy who accused Hissett was a huge scandal, and Nixon believed Hiss was guilty as sin. He pushed the investigation hard, and those pumpkin papers became key evidence.
Wait, he hid evidence in a pumpkin? That's some Scooby-Doo shit right there.
I know, right?
But
Yeah.
seriously, did this Hiss guy really turn out to be a spy?
He was convicted of perjury in 1950 for denying he'd passed documents to Chambers.
Okay.
To this day, some people still think Hiss was innocent, but for many at the time, Nixon became a goddamn hero for exposing him.
A hero more like a goddamn attack dog. This is where he got that Tricky Dick nickname, right?
Uh-huh.
Playing dirty, smearing opponents the whole 9 yards.
That reputation definitely stuck with him.
Yeah.
But it also helped him get elected to the Senate in 1950. He was riding high on that anti-communist wave.
Okay, so he was a senator. When did he become Eisenhower's sidekick?
That was in 1952. Eisenhower was running for president, and he needed a running mate. Nixon was young, had that anti-communist street cred, and could help win California. He was the perfect attack dog to have by your side.
So basically, Eisenhower used him to win votes. Shocker.
Pretty much.
But wait, wasn't there some scandal even back then? Something about a secret slush fund?
Ah, yes, the infamous Checkers speech.
Checker speech.
Nixon was accused of having a secret fund maintained by his supporters, which they used to reimburse him for political expenses.
Sounds shady as fuck. Did Eisenhower dump him?
Not quite. Nixon went on TV and gave this super emotional speech defending himself. He denied any wrongdoing, played the humble family man card.
Oh, come on.
He even talked about his wife's simple cloth coat and how it was the only fur she had.
Wait, seriously, he was crying about his wife's goddamn coat. What a manipulative prick.
Hey, it worked. The public ate it up. The Republican Party was flooded with support, and Eisenhower kept him on the ticket.
Unbelievable. So he becomes VP. What did he do? Just sit around and polish Eisenhower's shoes?
Actually, Eisenhower gave him a surprising amount of responsibility. He attended cabinet meetings, chaired them when Ike was out, and traveled extensively representing the U.S.
Wow.
He even went to the Soviet Union and had that famous kitchen debate with Khrushchev.
The kitchen debate? What the fuck is that?
They were touring this model American home that was part of a cultural exhibit in Moscow. Suddenly, they're having this impromptu debate right there in the kitchen about the merits of capitalism versus communism.
That's hilarious. Did they throw vodka bottles at each other?
It got pretty heated. Yeah, a real clash of ideologies. And the whole thing was broadcast internationally. It became this symbolic moment of the Cold War. The point is, Nixon wasn't just some figurehead.
Right.
He was gaining experience building a reputation.
Yeah, a reputation for being a sneaky, ruthless bastard.
Well,
So is this when he sets his sights on the White House?
you bet he runs for president in 1960.
Okay.
He had the experience, the name recognition, but he was up against John F. Kennedy.
JFK, that pretty boy, silver spoon son of a bitch.
Right. Well, he was charismatic and presented himself as a fresh face, a symbol of change. The election was incredibly close, one of the tightest in American history.
And Nixon choked, right? Lost to the goddamn Kennedys.
He lost by a tiny margin. There were even accusations of voter fraud in some states.
Really?
But Nixon chose not to contest the results.
Why the fuck not? Sounds like he got robbed.
He felt that a drawn-out legal battle would damage the country's image and interests.
Oh, come on.
He conceded gracefully, but it had to be a bitter pill to swallow.
So what did he do? Crawl back to California with his tail between his legs?
He went back to California and practiced law, but the guy was a goddamn political animal. He couldn't stay away. He ran for governor of California in 1962.
Governor of California, what a step down from being VP. Was he that desperate to stay relevant?
He saw it as a way to stay in the game, build momentum for another presidential run, but he lost that too.
What a loser. Isn't this when he had that infamous meltdown, the "you won't have Nixon to kick around anymore" rant?
Yep, that's the one. He gave this bitter concession speech blaming the media for his defeat. People thought he was finished washed up.
So what happened? How the hell did he claw his way back from that?
That's where things get really interesting. He lays low for a while, writes a book, travels, but he's quietly working behind the scenes, rebuilding his network. He campaigns for other Republicans, showing his loyalty to the party. By 1968, the political landscape had changed drastically. America was a goddamn mess. The Vietnam War was raging, cities were burning, and the country was more divided than a pizza at a frat party.
Yeah, a total shit show.
Yeah.
So how does Tricky Dick use this chaos to his advantage? Did he like slither out from under a rock and promise to make America great again?
He campaigned on a platform of law and order, appealing to what he called the silent majority. These were folks who felt ignored, even threatened by all the social and political upheaval of the 60s.
The silent majority sounds like a bunch of uptight squares who hate fun.
They were definitely more conservative, uncomfortable with the protests, the riots, the counterculture, what they saw as a decline in traditional values. Nixon tapped into that anxiety, that yearning for stability. He promised a return to normalcy.
So he was like a goddamn political therapist promising to calm everyone's tits. And what about Vietnam? Did he have an actual plan to end that shit show?
He promised peace with honor in Vietnam, which appealed to both the hawks who wanted to win the war and the doves who just wanted it to end.
Peace with honor. What a load of bullshit. Did he actually have a plan, or was he just blowing smoke up everyone's asses?
He was vague on the details, but the message resonated with voters. He also picked Spiro Agnew as his running mate, a guy known for his harsh attacks on liberals and the anti-war movement.
Agnew, that prick, was even more of a hardliner than Nixon. What a dynamic duo. Did this strategy work? Did the silent majority buy it?
It did. Nixon won the election, but it was a tight race. He defeated Hubert Humphreys, the Democratic candidate, and George Wallace, a segregationist, running on a third-party ticket. It was a three-way race, a real goddamn circus, but Nixon came out on top.
The sneaky bastard pulled it off. So he becomes president in 1969, inherits a country that's a total clusterfuck. Vietnam's a quagmire. The economy's shaky, the Cold War is at its peak, and on top of all that, he's got to manage the fallout from his own shady-ass tactics.
Exactly. It's fascinating how he navigated this mess. He had to juggle these massive crises while trying to keep his own dirty laundry hidden.
Yeah, the dude was always walking that tightrope between genius and disaster. So what did he do first? Bomb the shit out of Vietnam?
He actually started withdrawing troops as part of his Vietnamization plan. The idea was to gradually hand over control of the war to the South Vietnamese while still backing them up with air power and supplies.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster. Did it work?
Not really. The war dragged on for another 4 years and thousands more Americans died, but Nixon also did something completely unexpected.
Wait, did he finally lose his shit and do Hanoi?
No, he opened up relations with China.
What China? The commies he'd been ranting about for decades.
Yep. In 1972, Nixon went on this historic trip to Beijing, met with Mao Zedong, and it was a total game changer.
I need a minute to process this. Nixon, the guy who built his career on fighting communism, is now best buddies with Chairman fucking Mao. What the fuck?
It was a bold move, full of risks, but it paid off. It helped isolate the Soviet Union, opened up new diplomatic and economic opportunities, and to this day, it's considered one of Nixon's greatest achievements.
Okay, I gotta admit, that's pretty badass. But did he also make deals with the devil? like literally.
He also pursued détente with the Soviet Union, easing tensions through diplomacy and arms control agreements. He visited Moscow in 1972 and signed the Salt-Eye Treaty, limiting the growth of nuclear weapons.
Well, he was playing both sides, commies and Soviets.
Yeah.
This guy was a master manipulator, a real goddamn chess pig.
He was a pragmatist, willing to do what he thought was necessary to advance American interests, even if it meant shaking hands with the enemy.
Yeah, and to stay in power, let's not forget about his domestic record.
Yeah.
He was a real piece of shit when it came to civil rights and the war on drugs, right?
His domestic record is definitely mixed. He created the EPA, expanded Social Security, and implemented affirmative action programs. But he also escalated the war on drugs, which disproportionately targeted minority communities. And then there's the Southern strategy, where he appealed to white voters in the South who were anxious about racial integration and civil rights.
The Southern strategy.
Yeah.
What the fuck was that all about?
Basically, Nixon and his advisors realized they could exploit racial anxieties and resentment to win elections. They used coded language dog whistles to appeal to white voters without being explicitly racist. It was cynical and divisive, but it was effective.
So a real bag of dicks, good and bad, all wrapped up in one sweaty package. But let's be real, his legacy is all about, I'm thinking Watergate. How the hell did that even happen? Did he just wake up one morning and decide to fuck himself over?
Watergate is a long and twisted tale of paranoia, power, and corruption. It all starts with a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate Hotel in 1972.
Wait, a break-in? Were they trying to steal Hillary's emails?
This was 1972. Remember, they were trying to plant listening devices, gather intelligence on their political opponents.
Seriously, like some goddamn spy movie bullshit. Who the fuck thought that was a good idea?
It was a colossally stupid move, and it quickly unraveled. The burglars were caught, and the investigation revealed connections to the White House and Nixon's re-election campaign.
So they were spying on their opponents, and
Yeah.
this is all tied back to Nixon.
It went deeper than just spying. There was a cover-up, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, all orchestrated from the Oval Office.
Holy shit, did Nixon think he was above the law? Was he that arrogant?
He was obsessed with secrecy, with controlling the narrative. He saw enemies everywhere. Even within his own party, he became consumed by the scandal, trying to contain it, deny it, spin it.
And then there's the tapes, right? The smoking gun that blew his whole fucking world apart.
The tapes were the final nail in his coffin. It was revealed that Nixon had a secret recording system in the Oval Office, capturing all his conversations.
Wait, he was recording everything? The paranoid fucker? What was he thinking?
He claimed it was for historical purposes, but it backfired spectacularly. The tapes revealed his involvement in the cover-up, his lies, his attempts to obstruct justice. It was all there in his own goddamn voice.
Damn, that's some Shakespearean-level tragedy.
So what happened? Did he go on TV and have another crying fit about his wife's coat?
This time, even a crocodile tear performance wasn't going to save him. The House of Representatives began impeachment proceedings, and the Senate was ready to convict him. He was facing certain removal from office.
So they were going to kick his ass out of office.
He knew he was cornered. So in August of 1974, he resigned, became the first and only U.S. president to ever resign from office.
What a goddamn downfall, from the heights of power to the depths of disgrace. This story is wild.
It's a classic tale of hubris and self-destruction, a brilliant mind brought down by his own demons. Right, we need to take a piss break. Come back for part 3 to hear what happened after the Watergate shitstorm and how Nixon tried to salvage his reputation. All right, so Nixon's resigned in disgrace. The country's reeling. And everyone's wondering what the hell happens next. Did he just slink off to some bunker and hide from the world? Drink himself to death?
He retreated to his home in California, La Casa Pacifica. He was definitely in a dark place, facing possible criminal charges.
Wait, they could have thrown his ass in jail. That would have been epic.
He could have faced indictment for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, the whole 9 yards, but then Gerald Ford, who became president after Nixon resigned, pardoned him.
Pardoned him? What the fuck? So he got away with all that shit.
It was incredibly controversial. A lot of people felt betrayed by Ford. They thought Nixon should have been held accountable for his crimes.
Seriously, a total slap in the face to the American people. So did Nixon just kick back and enjoy his freedom, play golf with other disgraced politicians?
He kept a low profile for a while.
Yeah.
But Nixon was never one to stay down for long. He was ambitious, determined to rebuild his legacy.
Rebuild his legacy? The guy was a goddamn criminal. How do you get back from that?
He published his memoirs in 1978. Then several other books on foreign policy and his time in office.
Books? Seriously, was anyone actually buying that shit?
They were bestsellers. People were curious to hear his side of the story, his reflections on his presidency and Watergate. He also started giving lectures, traveling, meeting with world leaders.
So he reinvented himself as some sort of wise old sage, the comeback kid.
He was a shrewd political analyst, and people started taking him seriously again. He became this elder statesman, offering advice on foreign policy even to presidents who'd once opposed him.
Wow, that's some next-level bullshit artistry. He managed to whitewash his whole goddamn past.
Not completely. Watergate will always be a stain on his record, but he did manage to rehabilitate his image. To some extent, he died in 1994, and by then people were praising his foreign policy achievements, his strategic thinking.
That's insane. The guy was a master manipulator at the very end. So
Right.
what's the takeaway here? Is Nixon a villain or a hero, a genius or a crook?
That's the thing about Nixon. He defies easy categorization. He was brilliant and ruthless, visionary and paranoid. He had these incredible successes opening up China, negotiating with the Soviets, but he also had these fatal flaws, this deep-seated insecurity and hunger for power that ultimately destroyed him.
Yeah, what a mindfuck. He could have gone down as one of the greats. But instead, he's the poster boy for political corruption. What a waste.
It's a reminder that power corrupts, and even the most brilliant minds can be consumed by their own demons.
Well said. All right, folks, that's our deep dive into the twisted life of Richard Nixon. What a wild ride. I need a drink after all that. If you're as fascinated by this asshole as we are, go do some more research, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.